Aren't you going to say?
We're live. It is Friday, May 21st, 2021, 5:04 p.m. And, I want to start with a trigger warning here. Um, I am not going to say a certain word on this show, but I cannot promise it will not be said. If that's going to bother you, there are a lot of things to do with the hour between 5 and 6 o'clock on Friday evening. Um, None of them are off limits to you. But if you are the sort of person who will object to the pronunciation of a certain two-syllable word under all circumstances, perhaps this is not the hour of radio, television, live streaming, whatever it is that you want. There are other ways to spend your time. I'm not. We're not going to profligately use a certain word here, but if it happens to pass the lips of our guest or somebody asking questions about the word, we are not going to be censorious about that either. We're not allowed to have fun anymore. We are allowed to have John McWhorter discussing with us how we came to not be allowed to pronounce a certain word and how a word went from a word that was speakable but not directable to a word that was not actually speakable, which is something that happened in all of our adult lifetimes, at least if you're sort of above the age of 35. So, John, welcome back to In Lieu of Fun.
Thank you, Ben.
I want to start with the question. So, you wrote what I think is an incredibly timely, thoughtful New York Times essay, which is derived from a book that is now out. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
About the history of this word.
Hmm.
And the book more broadly, which I have not yet read, is about sort of bad words.
Hmm.
And I want to start with the question uh, of how distinctive in American or English language word use the sort of prohibition on the pronunciation of the syllables in question is. Does every generation have a word that you simply cannot say? Or is there something different about the N word in this generation where it is not only, it is not like a curse word, it's not like, an impolite thing, it is simply unpronounceable. And, people recently have lost their jobs, their podcasts, their livelihoods, their social respectability over pronouncing this word in the most innocent, or maybe not so innocent, of fashion. But what you would if there is an innocent fashion, that has been it. And so my question is, how distinctive is this, or is this a sort of normal cultural prohibition that right now it's this word, but there are always words like that?
Well, what we're dealing with, I don't think is generational. I think that it is what our society considers most controversial and that we're hung up on for good reasons or bad. And I think that what's going on is very normal, but it's something that we wouldn't associate with our particular kind of society. It's taboo. We have fashioned that particular word into a taboo term in the sense of a group of people we don't know very much about who do not utter a certain sequence of syllables because it's connected with a deceased figure of influence or some spirit within their cosmology. We're exhibiting taboo, and I think 35 and over, none of us are old enough now, I think, to remember when even a word like fuck was treated almost like this by what you might call respectable people. And so Maxwell Perkins, the editor, wouldn't say that word. Here's a sophisticated man, drank a lot, living in New York City, publishing Hemingway. He couldn't say fuck. He just simply wouldn't do it. I imagine he must have when he was in his cups, but that wasn't something he would sit and say in his office the way I'm doing it right now. So that kind of taboo is not alien to first world cultures, if we're going to use that term. And it's just that we have shifted our treatment of sexual terms in that way to terms that are about groups. And I should say this is very important because I'm sitting here, I'm black, I'm saying this, we're talking about the book. People are very naturally going to think, because of the way the book has gotten covered, especially post pandemic, but I wrote it before any of this happened. People are going to think that it's a book about the N word and then a few other things about cursing. No, Nine Nasty Words is about dirty words, and I figured I should include the N word because it's become one. And I would have included it if I were white. It is not a race book in any way. I didn't start out thinking about the N word. I started out thinking about the word fuck, which is a lot of fun. And the N word is just one of 11 chapters. But in these times, of course, that chapter has taken on a certain importance. But I just want people to know Nine Nasty Words is a delightful, funny, read little book. It is not a sober meditation by one more black scholar about the N-word. But there is a chapter about the N-word in it, and the topic is interesting. But that being said, the N-word has become a taboo word for us. And I find it very understandable if I classify it that way.
So help me out. Are there are other words that reflect similar caste disparagement, similar domination, similar I'm thinking about two sexual terms or gender terms, as well as some other ethnic terms.
Mm-hmm.
There is no other word that I know of that will presumptively cause an uproar if uttered. And I guess the question is, how do you think the uniqueness of the taboo developed?
Well, I think that here I'm supposed to say something about how America is all about race. And in some ways it is. And the issue of Black people's history in this country and the unfairness with which we have been treated and sometimes still are today is huge. And also, I think that the ruling white class, especially the intelligentsia, are particularly concerned with our racial tensions, particularly concerned with expunging the stamp of racism from themselves and from the country. And I think many people know that I think that effort sometimes goes overboard and becomes more about white people than black people. But still, it's a noble impulse in itself. And that means that naturally the N word is going to have a particular taboo on it. But we shouldn't forget.
But hang on a second. There are other disparaging words for black people.
Mm-hmm, but
there
there's
are
going to
other
be
slurs that I'm thinking of one that starts with C.
But it's a little antique. A little antique. It's kind of like the one that begins with K that might have been thrown at you 100 years ago.
Or
it's a little old, you know.
Sure. I guess I'm just interested in why they don't. Do you think it's the age that causes them not to carry the same weight?
Yeah. I mean, for example, I've never heard coon. I feel comfortable saying it. I have never heard it said outside of quotation marks. It's a little
That's
rural these days, and it's just old, as is Jungle Bunny. Jungle Bunny is a joke. It's not something people actually say. I know people actually said it 50 years ago. They might be doing it now, but the N word is much more current. But think of FAGGOT and how different it's become. Eddie Murphy could toss it around in Raw in late 80s, it was, and that was considered funny. No mainstream comedian could get away with that today. And remember, in the early aughts, I think it was mid aughts, Isaiah Washington, who ironically is black, the actor, called another actor on Grey's Anatomy and FAGGOT, and it really affected his career. He was dismissed from the show. I don't remember whether it was suspended or dismissed. That wouldn't have happened 10 years before that. So that kind of taboo on slurs, it's not only the N-word, but the N-word is certainly the hottest one. Yes.
Can I ask you something which you said earlier, which I thought was really interesting, which is about development of cursing over time. No, I'm sorry. I said I wasn't going to ask you that question. No, this idea that John said, "Don't ask me that question," because he's bored of it, and I was like, "Okay, of course." And then no, but how we've moved from sexual, so the kind of taboo words from that used to be sexualized have now become identitarian. So
salty.
Right. And so I was actually wondering, first of all, like why that is, in the sense that like what role is taboo playing in culture, such that we need to have something play that role. But then also, don't you think that seems like a good development? If something has to play that role, maybe it's that you can't disparage groups as opposed to talking about the sexual act, which is not.
I completely agree. Yeah, cursing starts with blasphemy. It starts with not being able to take the Lord's name in vain. And it depends on how you feel about those things, but I personally think that it's fine that we have moved. Most of us are no longer in that space, although some people may prefer to be. And then to be hung up over issues of sex in the body feels natural to us because that's what we grew up in. But that's not the way things have to be, and they aren't in many societies, in terms of those things being profane as opposed to something that you might giggle about. And to be concerned about slurring subgroups of people is advanced, I think, compared to I hate to offend religious people because I am an atheist and I've started being a little louder about that over the past few years. But I consider our current hang up to be more mature than the other two. Yeah, it's a development in that sense.
But I would say one thing. I would say I find it so strange and irrational of me that I won't say the N-word even alone. Like
honestly, it's gotten to the point. Yeah, and you know how that may. I'm not offended, but the fact that it's gotten to the point that you feel that way.
Yeah.
It embarrasses me a little bit because
it's not your fault. No, it slightly embarrasses me. That's why I said it was irrational. I don't understand it.
But I want to interrogate that a little bit on both of your parts.
Okay.
Scott, why does it embarrass you that you feel that you have that inhibition? And John, why of all things does it embarrass you that Scott has that inhibition?
Scott, you go first.
Well, first of all, I don't feel that way about like Jewish slurs. So it's not like I haven't been the object of it either. So, but it feels, I'm sorry to use that word. It feels dirty. It feels wrong. And I feel embarrassed about it because I'm in my room. Nobody's hearing it. It can't possibly affect anything of value. That is because nobody's hearing it, and yet I won't do it. I mean, if you paid me $1,000 to do it in my room, maybe I would do it. But like, that's just weird. That's just that I don't understand myself.
And I do, because it is considered such a sin in our current society. But the reason it embarrasses me, Ben, is because it implies that I am delicate. And Scott, I know this isn't what you mean, but it implies that I'm delicate beyond any degree most of us would consider to be a cognitively coherent human being. And yet, I know there are a great many Black people who think that this is great and walk around saying things like, Black people are feeling fragile these days. We don't ever want to hear the word. Jenna Wortham, who works at the Times, is on record as having said that. And she is a perfectly sane person. So I know that I am pushing the envelope a little bit in saying it, but I wish that we weren't implying that Black people walk around feeling a little fragile all the time, because frankly, I don't. And I don't think most Black people do. I think that there is a kind of kabuki that all of us go through because we're told to. So yeah, I wish that you could say it to yourself in private, because 25 years ago you would have. Your equivalent would have.
So question, is the fundamental taboo here a taboo that and an attribution of taboo is obviously impossible in any precise sense. But is the source of this taboo ultimately Black people saying this is a standard that we expect white people to comport with? Or is the source of this taboo ultimately white people deciding for black people what they can and can't tolerate and imposing it on, like, is the fundamental source of this taboo the sensibility of black people or the sensibility of liberal white people?
I'm pretty sure it's both. This new sensibility settles in the late 90s. It seems to have been in the wake of the OJ trial when Christopher Darden made a particular speech about it being a uniquely evil word. And I think it's been a conspiracy, not literally, but between black leaders and thinkers. I don't think other black people as much as black leaders and thinkers thinking that we needed to police the word more closely, and what you might call allies of black people, i.e. most of the white intelligentsia, going along with it and perhaps even initiating it out of an idea that one way that you show that you are not racist, and that's not a bad thing in itself, is not only to never call anybody that, but the thing is, by the 1990s, almost no quote unquote enlightened white person ever would have. You weren't sensing that you were holding yourself back from calling people that. You have to have something else. And so it might be the sheer utterance of the word at all. That's something you had to hold yourself back from. And so I think my sense of it, not that I was studying it formally at the time, but it was both. It was something I was still in Berkeley at the time with, both kinds of people that we're talking about. And I think it was everybody. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I don't feel like this is something imposed upon me by whites. There are many, many black people who fully are happy to hear Scott say what he said. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I don't feel the way they do.
Well, of the 9 words, which is your favorite?
Fuck. I think it's funny. It's part of motherfucker.
It's also one of the only words that can be used as any part of speech.
It's grammatically Baroque. Yeah, exactly.
Given the famous Ben Bradley moment during World War II where the Jeep brakes, he lifts the hood, looks at the smoking engine and says, "The fucking fuck is fucked." There are very few words that you can do that with.
And it means something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a completely coherent English sentence.
Utterly beautiful. Yeah. Russian does that with their words for "if I may," dick, and the word vagina. Same thing, just all over the language, used as any part of speech. For us, it happens to be fuck. It's part of what real English is. Exactly.
What's your favorite fact about fuck? Give us a fun fact.
The funnest thing is that it first appears officially in English in name. And so there were men walking around taking themselves seriously with names like Henry Fuck Butter and Roger Fuck by the Navel. And these weren't like Monty Python characters. They aren't like in the King's Comedy Company or something. They were actual burgerly figures, and you were allowed to just have a name that made people sicker. And that was when that word was salty, but it wasn't profane. So that's the best fuck story I know.
Can I just say something? That's a great fuck story. Thank you very much. I mean, I didn't expect it to be that good. Thank you.
Oh yeah, that's real. That is definitely real. I know. This all started with me wanting to study fuck more, and then thinking this could actually go further and be a book about all the bad words.
Well, by the way, can I just say one thing, Ben? Just I have to, but I think, of course, for people out in the audience, there's a website called SSRN, which is the Social Science Research Council, which where a lot of people from law and social science, they all put up articles, and like you put them free open access, but like they have downloads, so they get ranked by downloads, and the highest ranked paper is of course called fuck. It's about the constitutionality of the word fuck. But of course, it's the number one. Like, there's something like 300,000 papers on SSRN, but number one it's titled fuck.
This is our essence. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. Because people go to any search engine and they type the word fuck and see what comes up.
We do.
So, what are the other 7 words that the book focuses on?
Well, the book actually focuses on 12. 9 nasty sounded good because of the alliteration, but it's really 12 nasty words. And they are um, damn, hell, shit, fuck, ass, dick, bitch, cunt, pussy, nigger, faggot, and motherfucker. The book is about all 12 of those. And I didn't want to do the
It's a
female
very
ones at first,
Carlin-esque.
but it's Carlin for today because now you have to add the slurs. And, I thought cocksucker was a little archaic, although I'm told that some people do still use it. I've never used it. I've heard it used outside of quotation marks, but apparently I'm wrong. There are people who are still using it.
I have been called a cocksucker by somebody about whom I was writing a less than flattering story, and I called him for comment, and he informed me that the people who were accusing him in the stories were fucking cocksuckers, and so was I. So I have direct experience with with being called a cocksucker. Yeah.
Was this like somebody 80 and smoking a cigarette?
No, this was somebody prominent and respectable, and whose name would be familiar to a number of people in the audience.
And it wasn't Bella Abzug?
No. This was somebody like a
He likes calling people
prominent member of the bar, who I thought had engaged in some significant improprieties, and the person's response was that the sources of my information were all cocksuckers, and so was I.
For me, it's not one of my go-tos.
No.
Definitely not.
But it's interesting. I've literally never noticed that about the Carlin list, is that it doesn't include slurs. They're all sexual.
Yeah, I mean
and scatological.
It wouldn't have occurred to him because slurs had not become profanity yet. It was a different era. People were using the N-word on TV with taste, but the idea was that it was a word that people use sometimes. Whereas now we're in a different time. And I thought it was time to revisit. I don't think anybody will believe that I wasn't really thinking of Carlin's list when this idea came up. But then I realized, I'm going to play off of that because everybody remembers that routine. Try to remember any other comedy routine in, say, the 1970s. So remember David Brenner? All these people who were around all the time. Remember anything he said? No. You remember that Carlin routine. Yeah. And so I wanted to just mine that vein. So, the history of these words is almost always interesting. The history of hell is not that interesting. I had to really squeeze that one hard. But with all the others, there was a cornucopia of things to say.
One of the most interesting words on that list is damn, which used to be, as late as Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah.
Is
Big D, right? Yeah.
Is sufficiently bad, sufficiently unpronounceable that there are euphemisms for it in HMS Pinafore. I never swear a big D. And then at the end, when he does say, he doesn't say damn, he says dammy. Right? He kind of gets close. And this is scandalous in the show. So you're a fan of musical theater. When did damn become... today it is so unobjectionable to say that people don't even understand it as an inappropriate word. Yeah. When did it go from being it has the opposite trajectory of the N-word. When does it... What is its trajectory toward respectability?
It's sooner than you might think, because even in early talkies, and this is before the Hays Code, and so it's mostly movies that justifiably nobody sees today. But if you're given to sitting through these creaky, earliest sound films, people say damn in them somewhat. Somebody will have trouble opening their glasses and damn. Or cartoon characters back then, the sort of primitive, shitty Mickey Mouse type cartoon characters. A couple of them would say damn and hell. And that showed that even then, those words were really losing their sting, even in that post-Victorian era. You start getting them in the occasional musical starting in the late 50s. By my reading, there's one lyric I'm now thinking of from 1953. George started the whole damn show. That would be in By the Beautiful Sea in 1953, but I'm not sure if that's the lyric. Definitely, damn and hell go hand in hand. And Rodgers and Hammerstein use hell in one song in Flower Drum Song, one of their lesser but successful entries. So yeah, by then, even by the 20s and 30s, damn and hell are profanity in name only. And by our times, really, I almost didn't use them in the book. I kind of thought, wouldn't it be nice if it really was 9 nasty words and motherfucker was just an addendum at the end, and that would make it 9 by leaving out damn and hell. But then I thought, no, because to do the history of profanity, you have to start with the ones that started the show, and that was damn and hell. And if you say, what are the bad words? I think we spontaneously always list damn and hell in there. Although upon reflection, we realize that those lost sting eons ago. So yeah, they're hangers on in the book, but I do start with them.
So, but I wanna focus on damn and hell because they have an interesting relationship to the N word. It seems to me, in that they've gone in the opposite direction over similar periods of time. As in your account, in this same period of time, the word that we now regard as so vile as to be unpronounceable was actually merely descriptive for a lot of people.
Exactly.
At the same time that the word damn, Gilbert can't bring himself to write.
Exactly.
And yet there are contexts in which it was important to be able to write damn, because you had to be able to say things like, if you do X, you risk damning your soul to hell, right? So what were the exceptions to the rule, just as we're now talking about the exceptions, if there are any, with respect to the N-word, there must have been a set of cultural exceptions. If you were a priest, if you were warning people of the dangers of hellfire, if you're James Joyce writing Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, there's a whole section of it where a priest is describing the smell of hell. He's not avoiding the word hell. So there must have been contexts in which it was acceptable to say, just as we're now arguing about whether there are contexts in which it's okay. So was there a known set of cultural rules where damn was okay, where hell was okay, or was it just like there must have been a common law of it?
Well, the idea with damn and hell was that you were supposed to use them sparingly and with sincerity. So the idea was that you don't swear in vain, so to speak. So it's okay to use damn to refer to what the neutral verb damn meant. It's okay to talk about the bad place, hell. It's okay to talk about damning people to hell if you actually mean it. The problem was if you were damning people to hell for tiny little things all the time, just as a crabby little gesture, that was considered a bad thing. So the etiquette for using damn and hell was different in that way, in that there were contexts in which it was okay to use them, as in reference, as opposed to wielding. It's losing that distinction with the N-word that makes it so confusing for a lot of us today, that carving out that space of exception, the only one seems to be that Black people can use it, but in a very different meaning, such that I, as a linguist, would classify it as a different word. But in terms of everything else, the idea is never use it at all, which feels is a kind of sacralization, oddly, given that damn and hell really were literally and, intentionally about religion.
So, John, so you're a linguist, obviously, and so I was wondering, what did you learn about language, the nature of language, from studying these words? Is there kind of some larger takeaway that you gleaned, or the reader should glean?
Yeah,
Reading about these words.
Yeah, I can't say I learned a whole lot of a grand nature. My idea was to share what I happen to already know. But the point was that words can have multifarious blossomings of meanings, and that I hope we can get used to that. So the N word certainly does, but so does fuck, so does shit, so does ass. And words start in one place, and then it can be absolutely amazing where they are on the other end. And so a faggot is a bundle of sticks, and now it's something quite different. That sort of thing has to happen step by step. Nobody within their lifetime is watching some weird leap. And so you have to find what were the steps, and you can trace that word through history and see. One of the steps is children. Actually, there were people who said, go inside and stop bothering me, you little faggots, is a mother talking to children in Ireland in 1950. And now here we are
And
with
it at that time in that context has no implications of homosexuality.
it actually is contemporaneous. The homosexual meaning pops up. I think I have evidence of it in the late 1800s, officially only with John Reed, of all people, in the teens. That's when you first see fag specifically used in that meaning. It must have existed before that. I'm sure I have an anecdote that puts it back into the
Mm.
1870s. And, but relatively late. But after that, in other places, it came to mean also a cigarette. The Brits use it
Right.
for that. And also, it could be extended from women, not only to gay men, but to children. The idea was that this faggot was a weak person. Yeah, unfortunately, that is the connotation. And so, yeah, it's fascinating. And do you know that in Britain, faggots is food? They're these little bundles of meat wrapped up, and that's a faggot, just like a bundle of wood. You can have faggots and potatoes in rural Great Britain, and that's considered perfectly normal. So the word has gone in all sorts of ways.
So there are other words that have radically different offense level meanings depending on how British the usage is. The one I'm thinking of is cunt,
Mm-hmm.
where there is no American usage of that word that is not offensive.
No,
And
no.
yet, British people routinely use it to refer to men as in a
Buddy.
certain buddy,
Mm-hmm.
like a certain um,
Like mate?
guy, mate,
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
Hey, he's a he's a good cunt.
Yeah.
And how did that divergence happen?
That hasn't been traced, but it follows what is very common in language, which is that words can go in any number of developments, just directions, just like sounds. And there's a range of options, and you can't always predict which one is going to happen, although you can explain where things end up. And so, for example, that word here, at first, it's used in exactly the same way as is now well known among black men and rap with with white men in 1950, 1930. I have an attestation of this from 1911, but it goes back to the 1600s. It's, oh, the cunt's out on the street tonight. That was exactly what the meaning was. And then, because of the feminist revolution, that word takes on a particularly obnoxious flavor and becomes taboo as it is now. And I think we're all thankful for that. But that didn't happen to be the pathway in Britain. They have always, for some reason, been a little easier about words for the vagina than us. They're also looser with the word pussy than we have ever been over there. You can see it in British sitcoms in the 70s. They make pussy jokes. And it's always technically about a cat, but you know what they're talking about. Nobody could have made jokes like that, even on All in the Family and Mary Tyler Moore here in the 70s. Standards would never have let that by.
Right.
They
There's no
worked
way.
hard.
There's no way Chrissy, and Jack and on Three's Company at the Regal Beagle are. There's not the
No.
Regal Pussy or
What are you
anything.
going to do about pussy at home? Right. That would be way too far, and they're running around half naked. And then in Holland, the word cunt just means butt. Like the word just, it went in a different direction, so to speak. And who could have predicted that? But that's just the way it happened to go, in Amsterdam and thereabouts. So you never know. You can only trace backwards and see that it wasn't entirely implausible.
So I want to ask you about a slur that I think is unique, that is not in your book, that I raised on the show the other day. The principal slur, you referred to the word kike. The principal slur for Jews is Jew. And I find this a fascinating historical anomaly. You know, the mostly if you're I mean, the word kike exists. It's still used in a limited way, I suppose. But mostly, you know, if when Hitler is writing about the Jew in Mein Kampf, he does the Jew, right? He doesn't have. There's no particularly disparaging other word for it. There's no analogous word to the N word, which is the disrespectful word that you can use in common parlance, at least until relatively recently. The word itself is its own slur. And I'm wondering how unusual is that? I cannot think of another example of it. But I am mindful of the number of words that I don't know and the number of slurs that I don't know. Is that an anomaly, or is that actually a more typical thing than I'm understanding?
You know, Ben, I know what I don't know, and that is something I do not know. I don't know another example of that. You're right. And it's interesting how the language and conventions seem to work around that, in that I would never say she's a Jew. I mean, we all know what that means, but I would say she's a Jewish person or she's Jewish. But to phrase it as she's a Jew sounds a little off. You could say it.
I mean, there's a very, very famous Woody Allen joke about this in Annie Hall, where he's the difference between saying somebody is Jewish and saying a Jew is a very pointed thing, and and it's, but again, it goes to the fact that calling somebody a Jew is a little bit confrontational,
just in itself. Yeah. And here's another thing I don't know why. The N-word was almost inevitably going to come to be used to mean buddy. You could have known that was going to happen probably in like 1700. It's a very common thing, because slurs are often taken on as ways of creating leveling and intimacy among the people that the slurs are aimed at. A mujik in Russian is a dirty peasant. Mujik in Russian can also mean buddy. But what I don't know the answer to is why Jews never started calling one another kikes or anything like that.
Or Jew. You don't. I mean, like, there.
Come on, you Jew.
Like,
right.
I won't say to Scott, "Hey, Jew, what's up with you?" Like that. That is just not a thing.
I would like to know why that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Apropos of that, there's that. I watched 30 Rock, the sitcom, over and over. And last night I was watching
twice through.
Okay, right. So maybe I'm like on my 30th time all through. I mean, I just watch it over and over again. So last night was the show where Salma Hayek is on, and so Salma Hayek is a Mexican, but on the show she's from Puerto Rico, and he says, Liz says to Jack Donaghy, to Alec Baldwin, what is she? She goes, she's Puerto Rican, and he goes, I don't know. Am I allowed to say that? And like, are you allowed to say that somebody's a Puerto Rican? Like, is that itself a slur? So then Jack Donaghy asks Salma Hayek, said, "What do you call yourself?" And she says, "I call myself a Puerto Rican." And Alec Baldwin goes, "That just doesn't sound right. That feels like very much the same kind of thing, where just to point out somebody's origin or something was itself so loaded that it becomes,
that you worry that it will be." Yeah.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah.
That show was very good at identifying these little rough spots, including with N-word.
Exactly. It handled race issues it was pretty ahead of time. It was also ahead of time about calling out Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein. I mean,
yeah. I would put 30 Rock as top 10 or 15 best TV shows ever in my book. I thought it was just brilliant.
Maybe it's not like top 2 or 3 for me, but
Yeah, good show. But yeah, these things get very obscure. They can be very subtle. In Japanese, the way you curse is not usually by pulling out some special word. They've got one, and predictably, vagina is the one. But the way you curse in Japanese is you fiddle with the honorifics of pronouns. There are 400 ways of saying I in Japanese. How you say it to somebody is the way that you strike the note of cursing. How you say you to somebody, how you say he, that's their cursing when you play with those and disrespect people. And with Jewish people in America, I think it shows that grammar can be cursing and that we don't say a Jew. You can say it, but I can't. I can't say it. It's going to happen whether we want it to or not. But yes, there's a Jewish
there are contexts in which you can say it, though. It's much subtler than that.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, it would be wholly unobjectionable for you to say, Leo Frank was lynched in Georgia because he was a Jew. This does not sound anomalous.
I wouldn't say that.
You wouldn't?
I would say, I would correct myself. I would think it, but I would correct myself and say because he was Jewish. I would feel like that was safer.
That's interesting. I think if it's said in a confrontational manner, it's presumptively confrontational. But again, this has to do with, like, if you just had a different word for it, this problem would go away. And so you wouldn't have to say, oh, it's okay, I'm just saying he's Jewish. Right? Like he's a Jew. Right? I think this flows from the absence of a slur.
How do you two feel about blacks versus black people, where some people feel there's a difference there? And I find it awkward because if you're writing for the media and you're dealing with a word limit, often blacks is more economical than black people or a black person or something like that. And yet it's been said that blacks is dismissive, and I know what people mean. Talk about sitcoms. Murphy Brown had an episode where they treated that, I seem to remember. And I'm not sure whether I'm just making it up these days, but are you two comfortable saying blacks do this? Well, no, not that, but blacks X as opposed to black people X?
Again, I think it's very contextual. So I have no problem saying the phrase "the black vote." Right. I have no problem with saying, like, it's the more black is the noun, the more like you are gonna feel a little bit uncomfortable saying it. Joe Biden went to Georgia to appeal to black voters is more comfortable to say than Joe Biden went to Georgia to campaign among blacks right?
For the black. I mean, you could that sounds really bad.
It sounds really wrong. And all right, let's go to audience questions. Brad Grossman, the floor is yours.
Hello. Let me take a second to gather my thoughts.
I know that book.
I thought a little product placement would be appropriate. When my son was about 8 or 9, and he's 16 now, we read Huckleberry Finn. He'd started to read it, but he was a little young and it's a little hard to sort of follow, but it's much easier. It's much easier read out loud.
Yes.
So I read the book to him out loud in its entirety. We discussed the language in it. It was, but still, there's no getting away from it. It's important to the book, and but I'm not sure I would today. Like I feel, I don't feel bad about it. I would, it was the right thing to do. But it just feels like in a really short amount of time, just doing that has been has sort of changed. Right. And so I guess, like, what does that say for even that as a book? Like, is that going to be? Is it going to go away? Is it going to be?
If America
Is it going to be canceled?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's to pull that book out of the general consciousness and make it obscure to the next generation is simply unnecessary, is the way I feel. Why are we doing that? What you did for your son about 10 minutes ago was perfectly civilized. It was a sign of advanced consciousness of a white person introducing their child to a masterpiece of literature that unfortunately has certain signs of its time within it, but also in some ways dealt with sensitively. And I'm sure, there are many people in particular who would say that it's good that we're just going to throw the thing down into the sewer. But I'm not one of them, and I would have to ask why. For example, what is the chance that your son was going to grow up to be somebody running around calling people that word? Your son is probably now quite sensitized about the word, regardless of having been exposed to Mark Twain. And in the meantime, is it for Black people? Is it that we are abstractly hurt to think that a white man is reading Huckleberry Finn to his child? I would have to say that I'm not. I have a mortgage to pay and I have books to read to my own kids. But, we're in a strange time where to many people, what I'm saying is somehow unfeeling or backwards. I can only say I fully approve of what you did a few years ago. And my two girls are certainly going to be exposed to Huckleberry Finn, complete with all the voices and every word that's in the book. And I know they will be just fine. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to give it to them because I can tell that they're never going to be exposed to it in school.
Can I ask about your brief account earlier of the word, the Black English vernacular version of the word that is routinely said and kind of means guy, and that you say from your point of view as a linguist is a different word. I'm fascinated by that. I understand what you mean as a linguist, but it's a different word in a weird sense, which is
it is
like if I say it, it's the same word, right? And if you say it, it's a different word. I'm just interested for your thoughts on that.
That is a very peculiar way for a word to be, no doubt. It's not something where I give the linguist typical answer. Oh, that's the way it is in Sulawesi and in Norway with these other words. No, it's not. But then on the other hand, notice how we're trying to fix it. Notice how there's a certain generation of non-Black boys who are using the version of it that ends in A to mean buddy among one another, and then finding themselves sanctioned as if they're using the slur. I mean, talk about fuzzy categories. This stuff is really hard, but I can put myself into the head of this Caleb person. That's what this white boy's name probably is. Caleb thinks he can say this to Jacob because they both grew up listening to hip hop and they feel like a little part of them is a Black man of the streets. You can completely understand that. It's their favorite music and it's in their lyrics and they want to have a word for buddy. And so it comes out of them very spontaneously, but it doesn't look right because the right color. It's a very rich word. I can't hate Caleb for that. Once again, a lot of Black people would disagree with me. I get why Caleb is doing that. I think he needs to think about what it looks like, given realities. But I can see how it would it does not happen out of hatred. It happens out of camaraderie.
Daniel, the floor is yours if you can talk over the sound of Scott's chair.
Oh my God! I'm so sorry. I was just I was sawing it in half.
I am curious.
I'm so sorry.
I'm curious what role the use mention distinction has played in your thinking about dirty words or taboo words.
Well, with the N-word, it's that distinction used to be how we used. By used to, I mean as late as 2000. And that seemed good enough for me. It didn't send me flying into therapy to hear somebody use the word in reference. But apparently I was a little backwards on that. Apparently that marks me as an old man. And we'll see where it goes. But from what I see, the current generation is really going to keep enforcing that. I mean, people say 16 and younger. It's really inculcated, and they're going to be grown up soon. And so, you don't always like the way things change, but yes, the exquisite sensitivity of late. I'm not sure what the purpose is, but I'm just one person.
Have you gotten a lot of blowback for it? I mean, I know that white people citing your work as defense is considered its own form of, prescribed. But
Because I'm not representative, right? Yeah.
or because I don't know, because your work is convenient for certain people, including, certain mutual friends of ours. But I do like. Is there a segment of either the woke left or the black community that is upset with you over the substance of your... I mean, I haven't actually seen criticism of you. I've just seen people who are arguing a different point about the word.
Well, nowadays you get jumped about things like that on Twitter. And there have been people on Twitter who have been quite annoyed with me about saying this sort of thing, although they tend to accuse me of saying that we could just use the word. They have this vision of this Uncle Tom, I guess, who's saying, yes, call us that. There's no problem with it. When, of course, what I'm saying is you should be able to, with taste, refer to the word, especially when you're probably criticizing it with the reference. I genuinely don't know whether those people are pretending to think I'm an idiot because they're enjoying the rhetoric, which is something people do, or whether they genuinely don't understand the distinction, which would be a shame because I thought it was so clear. I genuinely don't know which one it is. But yeah, I get definite blowback on this. And as you might imagine, it's usually from it's usually from black academics. So there is pushback.
Christopher Argyris.
All right. Thanks for having me on, Ben. And this question might require sort of a clarification or contextual stuff if John's not familiar with the case. So if you could just leave me on after I answer the question if he has to follow. Thank you. Okay. So I'm a PhD in law at SOAS University of London. And the director was suspended in March for being on sounds like you're familiar with the case, being on a student forum, student minority forum, and voicing the N-word twice in response to a question about treatment of black students and minorities at the school. And he was challenged in the moment, and some of the students said, you can't say that word. We can say this, but you can't say that word. And his response was, "Well, I'm South African, and it's not used as a pejorative. It's not used in South Africa this way. It's fine to use that in context." But he was suspended while the university investigated, and then he was recently reinstated with a sort of a program of restorative justice, when I think most people probably were calling for him to be sacked. So I wondered, we've had a South African in the audience say that there's no acceptable use in South Africa. I wondered if you knew anything about that or not. And then secondly, how would you expect this kind of thing to be handled if a university president, which is the equivalent of director in the UK, if a university president vocalized these words in a similar context, not in a aggressive way, but sort of in a contemplative way.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a difference between how I feel and how society feels, a representative number of people in society. And I'm not one to, if I were in an administrative position, which I'm not and hopefully never will be, I wouldn't impose my view on the community. I think that, one, this person is clearly a rabble-rouser. I think the person should have been sanctioned. If he was only using, notice I assume it was a he, if he was only using the word in reference, I think that the idea that he should lose his job or be chased off of the campus is oversensitive. I think that the implication that if he says the word, Black people are so injured that they cannot be expected to function with him around. I think that's theater. And I even feel comfortable saying that about a culture, i.e., Britain, that is not mine. However, the idea that in South African English you can use that word even in reference with that kind of casual abandon, I wasn't aware of it. I suspect some of this is coming from Afrikaans, the other European language in South Africa, where that root, that word occupies a different splotch and there are different meanings around it. But you can't go from Afrikaans to English across the ocean. I mean, I get the feeling that person is obnoxious.
Sure, and I should clarify that this director, he's a South African of South Asian descent, so he's neither Afrikaans nor African Black.
Then he's just a jackass. I mean, yeah that's that's clear. But I would not send him to Mars. But on that, I differ from where the culture seems to be going.
All right, Esther, you get the last question today. But I'm having trouble unmuting you. Oh, there you are.
There we go.
Yeah, you're good.
I'm okay now. So I think Ben's question and Christopher's both touched on what I'm asking about. Sorry, that's my oven. Sorry, my challah is on a second rise. I am Jewish. But not an Orthodox Jew. So every Friday night after Shabbat dinner, our daughter introduces us. She's just graduated college. She introduces us to new music videos. So it's a very exciting time. And one Friday, she puts on Megan Thee Stallion, and the N-word is in the song. And she says to me, but I'm not supposed to say this word, even though it's in the song. So my kid, and touching on Christopher's issue, my children grew up in New Zealand, so they're not as familiar or don't feel U.S. history the way that I do, having grown up in Texas. So she struggles to understand why, if this is a commercial product that is being put out online, why she's not allowed to sing along and say this word. And if she's at a party and the song comes up, why is she not allowed to say this word? So if I'm around Orthodox Jews, I do respect their beliefs, but I am given something to say in place of saying the word God that in their certain circumstances they would not say. So, can she not be given something else to say at that point in the song, for example, if there's a sensitivity? Does it being a commercial product make this any different?
That's very subtle. And I don't know, I would say maybe think about some traditions among the Maori or the Samoans or the Tongans, to go closer to where they grew up, where you have to understand that this is now a magic word. Everything isn't going to make perfect sense. But it really would be a good thing if there was some conventionally understood word with the same, rhythm and flavor as that one that white kids could use so they could sing along with the lyrics of their favorite music. Frankly, think that this prohibition is excessive, for example, here, given the nature of the music that those children think of as their own. But we have to work with what we've got. So yeah, it's a magic word now. That's what we have to realize. The explanations will not always be there. You just have to observe. And it's hard. It's tricky. And when it's this hard to explain it to children, something unusual has happened. And that's what's happened here.
We're going to leave it there. John McWhorter, you're a supremely great American. It's great to see your face and hear your voice.
Thanks for having me.
We will... I'm very much looking forward to reading your new book. And for those who have not read the excerpt from the book on the history of the N-word, it is a remarkably interesting and diverse essay with a lot of history I did not know and a lot of just really clear thought. So thanks for having the guts to publish it.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. And thank you, Scott.
We will be back tomorrow I don't know if Kate will be joining us from a volcano from the Law Rock, but she will be somewhere in Iceland. It'll be just Scott and me, and maybe Kate if she can get an internet connection. That'll be 22 hours and 57 minutes from now. And until then, Scott?
We can't have fun anymore, but we can have great fuck stories.
We can.
So thank you so much, John. This was fantastic.